Hey there you guys, welcome back. Today we are going to discuss a topic that comes up all the time for me, and it's one of the hardest ones to answer because there's so many different answers. And none of them... It all depends on your environment. The question is, how and when do I water my orchids? How much water does my orchid need? How do I know that it needs to be watered? The question, it's so hard, and it's such a vague question usually when people ask. I have an orchid, how do I water it? I give it water, but it still died. I let it dry, but it still died. It all comes down to the media that you keep it in and the type of orchid it is. Orchids come in various species, and each species seems to want to be treated a little bit differently. However, one rule of thumb with many orchids, not all of them, is orchids like to be watered well when you water them, and then they like to dry between waterings, or almost dry between waterings. So things like a Phalaenopsis, if you have it in moss, which I have one in moss right here. If you do have one in moss and you're a beginner, I recommend taking it out of the moss and putting it in a bark medium, maybe with a little bit of moss, if you're unfamiliar with how to water, or if you're not a big waterer like myself. I like to keep things on the dry side. Most of you are probably laughing because, as most of you know, I'm a lazy gardener and I neglect. I shouldn't be telling people how to water their plants, but I will. I do keep things alive. That matters. When you have moss stays really wet. Phalaenopsis are great for beginners because they're very forgiving. However, if you are a waterer, you like to go and every 3 days religiously because it likes to be watered, or you've read that it needs water every 3 days, the moss will stay wet for a long time. You might not need to water or re-water a Phalaenopsis in sphagnum moss for 2, even 3 weeks, depending on your home environment. You have to feel it. When I have a Phalaenopsis in sphagnum moss, what I do is I immediately, when I think I might want to water, I touch the soil, the surface of the moss. If it's crunchy, I know that I can water it. And when I do water it, I will just run it under the tap. If you're new to orchids and you have a beautiful window in your kitchen by the sink, I recommend keeping your first orchid there. That way you can check on it each day when you're doing the dishes or whatever. And if it needs to be watered, you just take the hose or you take the plant and run it under the water and get all the roots. You'll notice that the roots will go a green color when they've received enough moisture. You don't want to water moss too thoroughly because it gets right into the core and it doesn't dry out really quickly. It holds onto it like a sponge. So just be very careful. You'll notice if you grow phals in a moss media and you go to repot it, almost all of the roots are usually dead because it's been sitting in moisture for too long. And also when you water, make sure to also water the aerial roots. They do produce aerial roots, as you know, Phalaenopsis. Don't trim them off, water them normally, and those can come in handy later on down the road. If the plant gets too tall and you need to cut it down, you can plant the crown of the plant back in a media and use the aerial roots as actual roots. So that's one type of media, is the moss. Be very careful with moss. If you're a beginner, again, take it out of the moss. Some moss is okay, but you need to have like good airflow to the roots. That's why bark is a little bit better. Here is another one. This one here is grown in bark. This is the best. This is fantastic because what I do is I have them in a pot cover like so, and I fill it up with water and wait for about 10 minutes. The bark will soak up any moisture that it needs, and so will the roots that are in the pot. And then I take the pot out, I let it drain thoroughly, I dump the excess... There was water in there. It's down the bottom, it wasn't sitting in the plant. So I dump the excess water away, and then I will put the pot back in there. It's nice to use a decorative pot for your plants, because sometimes, because the media gets dry and it's very light media, sometimes your plant gets top heavy and it tips over. So I use these decorative pots just to make sure things are secure and stable. Another one, and with these ones, depending on your situation, depending on your humidity and whatever, again, you can feel it, you can touch it, and if it's dry, that's when you rewater a Phalaenopsis. Here's another phal that I have growing in. It's a mixture of sphagnum moss and these hydroton beads. These are used for hydroponics. This one, I can water this one every day because the beads hold moisture, but they don't. It's not constantly on the roots. I can't get my words out. It's not constantly touching the roots, and it's a nice, easy media to work with when dealing with a Phalaenopsis that I don't know, if you like to water a lot. Most people will water maybe twice a week, once a week, normally. But if you're a heavy water and you need to do it every day, this is the media for you. Again, pay attention to the aerial roots. Phalaenopsis appreciate a dry period. You'll find that they do a little bit better. This one actually gets a little bit too dry from time to time. I want to switch it out of these clay beads and put it into more of a bark mix. The bark will stay moist a little bit longer. And I also want to pot this a little bit farther down. As you can see, the aerial roots are here. I try to spray the aerial roots. I have a mister that I come around and I spray them until they're nice green, but I see that they're a little bit shriveled. Story of my life. Story of my life. So yeah, if you like to water a lot, the clay beads are an excellent option for you. I still recommend putting a little bit of sphagnum moss in there to hold a little bit of moisture. You don't want to hold a lot, but there's a lot of airflow that goes through the clay beads. Another type of orchid is a Paphiopedilum. This one requires a similar amount of light to a Phalaenopsis. So if you can grow a Phalaenopsis, or maybe you've not tried a Phalaenopsis, but you don't want that style, you want the beautiful lady slipper style orchid, this one grows in a similar condition, lower light. This one actually requires a little bit higher light. The mottled leaves are the ones that require a little bit less light. These ones here, like slightly brighter. They still like indirect location. They don't want to be full sun. These are best planted in some moss. These are more of a terrestrial type orchid, and this doesn't have a pseudobulb like an Oncidium. See the pseudobulbs there? Those are water storage vessels, so that will keep them through a little bit of a dry period. These don't have that. So this particular plant likes to be kept moist all the time. Not soaking wet, but you want to make sure that it's damp all the time. So it doesn't mean put it in a container filled with water and plop it down. It's not a water lily. It doesn't like that. It still needs airflow to the roots. So you can mix maybe a little bit of fine orchid bark when you're planting it. Here's some fine orchid bark in there. Looks pretty fine to me. And so you're mixing sphagnum moss with that fine bark, and you want to keep it in a tight pot. These ones I tend to water a little bit, maybe every second day. Again, in the middle of summer, if it's really, really hot, really, really dry, maybe you have to water them every day. Again, depending on your home, these all change. So it's best to feel it out, touch the surface of the media, and if it feels dry, for sure give it a drink. And not always, if it's a bigger pot, if the surface feels dry, maybe farther down, it's still a little bit moist, so you're probably okay. Here's another Paphiopedilum. This one, again, I water frequently. It looks beautiful. This is actually bigger than I thought it was. These things grow like weeds sometimes. Another variety that is another common one is an Oncidium. This is a very, very common one. If you have more light, if you have a little bit of direct light, morning, late afternoon, not direct midday sun, but just more light than a Phalaenopsis would require. Oncidium might be the one for you. Maybe you're going to try this out for your first orchid. These ones like to have a orchid bark. I would go with a medium-sized orchid bark with this one. And they like to be watered fairly regular in an orchid bark situation. I would almost treat them like I told you about the Phalaenopsis, where they like to be watered, but then they just get to be dry, and then you water it again. You don't want to wait until they're bone dry, but just... These ones don't have as thick of a root as a Phalaenopsis. If you were to pull it out... let me see here. Can I pull it out? Hey, you're crunchy. No, I can't pull it out at the moment. These have much more fine root system, so they don't want to stay as dry as a Phalaenopsis maybe would. So just as it approaches dryness, you want to water it again. Moss is not a great one because it stays too wet too long. I do recommend a bark media with this, with a little bit of sphagnum moss, if you are a lazy waterer like I am. Yeah. So anyway, if you have any further questions on watering your orchids, I'll do my best to try to help you out. Best to say what variety you have, what sort of conditions you have, what soil or what media you're using, whether it's in moss, whether it's in bark, whether it's in something else. Let me know. Maybe it's in lava rock. I don't know. And I can better help you with that. But the vague questions, how do I water it? It's really hard to tell you. So anyway, I hope this video was helpful. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. And join us on the Plants and Things What's Growing page on Facebook. If you have any questions, take a photo of your plant and ask it right there. There's so many knowledgeable people on there, and they're a lot of fun and they're really nice. So feel free to join us and join the club. Anyway, happy growing, everyone, and see you guys soon. Not a flower spike. It's got a green tip on it. It looks like a root. And then in the soil surface I have, or the media surface, I have some nice nice roots developing. So I'm very excited to say that I'm doing this rather well.